Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third GLF Live, a new series from Landscape News and the Global Landscapes Forum of live interviews with experts on COVID-19. I'm Gabrielle Lipton, the editor of Landscape News, and today we'll be hearing from Dr. Klaus Otto Scharmer. He is a senior lecturer at the MIT Management Sloan School and has written multiple best-selling books, including Theory U and Presence, which examine capitalism and systems change through improved awareness, and how we can look to the emerging future to change the present, which is one of his core philosophies called presencing. He also co-founded a massive open online course at MIT, which has since blossomed into a number of other online platforms. And most recently, just over a week ago, he launched Gaia, G-A-I-A, which stands for Global Activation of Intention and Action. And it's a free online Zoom platform to bring people together from around the world to help make sense of this time of change due to COVID-19. So you can visit that at presencing.org/Gaia. And the link to that is in the chat box. So Otto, thank you so much for making the time to speak with us today. And to start with, one of your foundational principles is that the mind and the world are not separate. How do the two reflect one another right now?
The mind and the world are not separate. I think that is so much reflected probably in our individual, but also our collective experience right now. And so I believe COVID-19 probably has been one of the most effective teachers in terms of systems thinking to all of us. So 7.8 billion of us, being the students. And what we are learning is that my behavior is changing the system. And what we are learning is that we are looking at the patterns of our own behavior. And I think the whole teaching around the interconnectedness of the web of life, kind of that we maybe knew from systems thinking intellectually before, that now really has been brought home to all of us, or to many more of us, let's put it that way, in a way that not only our head knows, but also our bodies know too. And I think it's just very, very remarkable what has happened the past few weeks. Because what we have seen is a change, right? An entire species, so mankind changed fundamental behaviors like hand washing, like social distancing. We became aware of the impact that our behavior have, and bending the curve means reflecting your own behavior, reflect on the level of the individual, but also on the level of the collective, and that has an impact on, it has changed our everyday practices, right? On a planetary scale, within days, within weeks. That's just very remarkable. There's no other species on the planet that can change the fundamental rules of our own behavior. I'm not saying at will, but, on reflection, I would say, in such a situation. And I think what we learned is, if we get our act together, if we really focus our attention on one subject, on one challenge that matters to us, then there's nothing we couldn't do, even within weeks. So collective behavior is transformed, massive resources are made available, and new patterns of collaboration from local to regional to global are beginning to take shape, all of which, of course, is 100% relevant for the climate and the biodiversity challenges that we all face.
Absolutely. 3 weeks ago, you posed a question in an article that you wrote and published on Medium. And the question is two parts. What if we used this disruption as an opportunity to let go of everything that isn't essential in our life, or in our work, and in our institutional routines? How might we reimagine how we live and work together? What have you learned in the 3 weeks since publishing that article about reimagining the way that we live? How would you answer that question for yourself?
Well, yes. So when we, I think it's an experience probably many of us have, kind of when, particularly when we have had near-death experiences, it's very apparent there. But it's also happening in any kind of profound disruption that in the moment disruption hits you, there is a small moment where you can reconceive of that what's truly essential for you in your life, in who you are and what you're trying to do, and those other things that maybe are not. And so I think we all have a version of that experience now. And what I have learned, well, I think it was the reason why we launched kind of this Gaia initiative that you mentioned at the outset, global activation of intention and action. And what we are beginning to hear there, we're just at the very beginning, and anyone can join anytime. But we are going to deepen this over the next 3-4 months. So what we are hearing is what's essential, right? It's kind of the connection we have to each other, right? Certain people very close to us, very close to our heart. And who is that actually? Who belongs into that inner circle? Who not? Who am I calling now in these days and who not? I think that's one level of discerning. Another one is nature, right? So really, that's the most fundamental, right? And going to certain places, kind of to connecting really with the places, with the land, kind of with Mother Nature is really at the root, right? Planetary health and well-being is at the root of our own health and well-being, and that nature not only has like an ecological, but also like an inner dimension, right? So we can feel a deeper resonance, right? A resonance that connects us with our own deepest sources. So you could say it has a spiritual dimension too, and that's actually, nature can be a gateway to connecting to our own deeper levels of resonance. I think that's the second one, and the third one is really connecting to your true purpose in life, and that's certainly something that that keeps evolving, right? That keeps clarifying, keeps changing. But in my experience, I exactly know and feel, my body feels. So when I'm connecting with my true purpose, the following thing is happening, which is the more you do, the more more energy you waste, the more energy returns, comes back. So I'm reminded of the German avant-garde artist Beuys. He once said, "I nourish myself through expanding or through wasting my energy." So that's actually, if you waste your energy on something that truly matters for you, that's the most nourishing, right? Because it's connecting to that deeper purpose. And I think now with the Gaia, and really in my case, it has to do with really creating a school for transformation that could democratize the access to methods and tools that help us to go through this period of transformation. And that, with Gaia, we prototype a little bit. So in that way, it has helped me. So that has been my own way of honing into something where I feel that's the most essential for me now. But I assume that that's different for different people. But what we learn in the Gaia experience is that we need each other to find that out. So for me to find that out, I cannot do that in isolation, right? So we need each other. We need deep listening. We need kind of spaces for social resonance where we can find out, and we need to get out of our little house, right? Houses, and move into the larger house of being that we live in on our land.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that beautiful response. You've also written about the 5 levels of behavior in response to change. And the 5th that you say is regenerating common will. How would you like to see common will reborn from this epidemic to better tackle other epidemics of the future, as well as climate change and inequality and other crises?
Yeah, so I think, I think there is, at first, probably, particularly someone like me, kind of, coming originally kind of from Germany, I should, first start with acknowledging that common will can be also a problematic term, right? It can be misused in dictatorships. So the Nazi period is not that far away in German history. So it can be misused, but I think the idea of the common will is that, and the idea of all movement building, and it's not only the idea, I would say it's the experience, really, the experience of the whole thing about presencing, which is that you feel a certain future possibility that you can connect with directly, and that begins to guide you in what you are doing in the now. This whole, and that this is not just an abstract idea that I find interesting, but it's something that you connect to with your heart, and that you also feel other people, right, from the same movement are connecting with, and you feel a direct connection to them around that. So all these experiences, I think, which are pretty general, pretty universal, I experienced as a young person back then in Europe, right, and the green movement, the peace movement, kind of the environmental movement of the 70s and early 80s. And I think it was like, almost everyone like in that generation kind of felt that back then. And I think we are moving, and then there are other periods in history where that is kind of more ceding to the background. But now we are back in such a moment where this sensing of that possibility becomes very very visceral, and can really help us to take the next steps. So help me with your question was.
How would you like to see common will be reborn out of this to tackle other issues?
So for example, in a movement, right, you're part of a collective. We know that from all communities we are in. We are part of a collective, and we know that this is more than, and that's actually the magic of that. It's more than just like an addition of individuals that somehow interconnect. So the common will is really less like an intellectual agenda, I would say, but more like a sensing capacity. So it's like the common will is something that keeps emerging, right? That's guiding us, and that's kind of that we feel is that what in the context of a specific community is beginning to emerge, to clarify. Now, of course, in a democracy, kind of, we try to develop mechanisms where we have more clarity around that. I mean, think about the Paris Agreement, right? So that's an example of like a common, on a global scale, right? The articulation of a common will that now we have the challenge to implement. But I would say that the common will and kind of is the articulation and the manifestation of a common will is something that we often missing, right? Because what we in our larger systems we have the parts, right? All the different kind of stakeholders that have their intention. But in order to really surface the common will, that often requires methodology that in the context of theory we call like a sensing, right? It's a deepening of perception and making sense of the situation together, and thereby surfacing what is actually that not my ego awareness is trying to make happen, right? But what is it that's from an ecosystem awareness, by which we mean an awareness that is really guided by and only become manifest when you really look at a situation from all the different stakeholders' views, particularly the most marginalized. So I would say that's the why the idea of the common will is very relevant today, even though it's also sometimes misunderstood, misused, and often not really fully articulated.
Mm-hmm. You've also written about acting from the whole and the good that can come from acting from the whole. In the past few months, due to this epidemic, we've seen borders close and countries largely deal with COVID-19 independently. So during times of crises, how can we as a global society better act from the whole?
Well, I would say it probably takes two things. I mean, generally, I would say so we talked about this moment of when disruption happens, right? So there's like, I think that the challenge is really when that happened to really kind of focus the attention of that, to become aware of that. Basically, I think the first step, you could almost say, is to stop downloading, right? By which I mean stop continuing to habitually project your habits of action and thought. So the first step is a little bit this kind of downloading, stop downloading, kind of the stopping, right? And stopping means becoming aware, paying attention. And then, paying attention to what's actually happening, to the experience that's happening to us. And then I think the next thing that happens in our experience is that when you really pause, you feel that there is a choice for you, how you respond to that situation. And the fundamental choice that we have, sometimes we are not noticing it, but we have in every single moment is the following. When something happens, I can turn away or I can turn towards, right? I can turn away and close down, or I can turn towards and open up. And that puts us into a different space, how we respond to a situation. And the turning away and closing down is really, it means closing the mind, closing the heart, closing the will, aka closing the mind means, denial, right? So denial and ignorance. Closing the heart means hate, maybe anger, something like that. Closing the will means, fear often, right? We close down. Opening these capacities means courage, compassion, curiosity, right? So open the mind, open the heart, kind of empathy, compassion. And on the level of the will, it's courage, and that's, I would say, the first thing that's required of us. Because when we move, if I see myself responding by turning away and closing down, it's not because I really choose to do so often. Often it is like a freeze reaction. I try to protect myself. It's just too much. I can't do it, right? So it's too challenging. I can't open up. So this whole phenomenon of Trumpism, if you want, right, that we see the rise of the far right or the fanaticism, polarization, all these things, it's a freeze reaction of the human mind. So the first thing we need to do is to practice, right, to build our own capacity for these three capacities: curiosity, compassion, and courage. So, aka opening the mind, the heart, the will. So that's the level of the individual. But on the level of the collective, I would say, so just doing that as an individual is not enough. I think what is called from us is also a collective response. And I think the collective response has to do with creating new innovation infrastructures on a societal level, at least on three different levels, which is new learning infrastructures for whole person, whole system ways of learning, integrating head, heart, and hand, basically reinventing education and learning structures, right, that we have in society around these lines. Secondly, new democratic infrastructures, by which I mean making democracy and governance more direct, more diverse, kind of bring in different voices, and more dialogic, right? By dialogue, I mean making the system see itself, so that we have different, less polarizing conversations, right? As communities, as societies. And on the third level, I think it's new economic infrastructures, and that essentially has to do with creating, we have now competition and kind of all the different markets, fine, right? So we need, of course, markets, right, for our economy, but we need something else, which is pre-market areas of collaboration, because where innovation today happens in small pockets, but where we really need innovation most is at the level of the whole system, right? How, as a system, we address the major challenges that probably brings everyone together in this call here, right? About biodiversity and climate and so forth. So these more systemic ways of bringing stakeholders together and kind of innovating at the scale of the whole system, not just in small pockets. That's what needs to be supported with new infrastructures, which are basically infrastructures of collaboration and innovation that complement the already existing infrastructures that we have around competition. Mm-hmm. So that's I think what it takes, kind of these three infrastructures. And the last one essentially is about shifting the economy from one way of organizing to another, right? The way it's organized today is basically around ecosystem awareness, right? That is serving the well-being of a few. I think, in Europe, it's not too bad, but if you look here, I mean, if you look at many other places, so you see the appalling levels of inequality just increasing. To one that is organized around ecosystem awareness, right? By which I mean an awareness that is focusing on the well-being for all. I think that's what we need to do. We have a decade for that, and I think it's quite doable. But of course, it needs, as we saw in the last 3 weeks, right? It needs real focused attention and a real effort, kind of that, where we basically can pull out all these obstacles that usually prevent systemic change from happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, and some of our audience members have posed some really great questions. So I'll put this one to you first. And this comes from Sanjay Patil in New York. And he is asking, in this moment, we see changes in human behavior and perspective because there's an immediate existential threat. How is similar change initiative in the absence of such a visceral threat? So for something more long-term like climate change or other things that could lead to competition over resources, or other things that are more long-term than the immediate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I, of course, hold the same question. It's not like, I have the answer, someone else has not. But what I have seen, so an interesting observation on that point is, so I, numerous times kind of bring like executive groups here on campus on MIT, and then they have some training, this or that. Kind of some leadership or other capacity building program for 3-4 days. What I usually try to build in, regardless whether they ask for that or not, is like a C-Roads climate change simulation game. So that's where you basically, and there's now En-ROADS, the next version, it's climateinteractive.org. You find all the so it's an outgrow of MIT, and it's a great tool kind of for addressing that question. But here's what I experienced in that. So you for example, when you do the workshop, kind of then the group is splitting up in teams, and for example, they simulate the climate negotiation, right? So with 6 different country groups and so on. And then they make decisions, and then you feed the computer with the decisions, and you see the projection, what it does for 2100, for the next 80 years. And usually you see kind of how, as long as people only operate from their pure self-interest, their ecosystem awareness, the system is getting nowhere. And at some point, and you need to run that multiple iterations so they realize and then make clear the sea level rise, and that the city you are living in, right, in East Asia is no longer there, right? It's no longer on the map, and these kind of things. And then, so I saw it multiple times how long it takes for that really to sink in, and then to let go of the conventional way of operating and really seeing what we are seeing now with the corona, which is, you basically pull out all the stops, whatever it takes, kind of. So, you shut down the economy, for example. It's that kind of approach. And what I found so instructing, and seeing many groups go through that, is it takes multiple iterations, and it takes physical sensation. So it's, as long as you only feed the model to the head, it's not arriving, right? And it's like, so we build the workshop then that there's then, one group has food, one group is not, and you experience the sea level rise who is no longer there, and so on. So it's kind of the moment you create an embodied experience, right? That's where the mind shifts. As long as you just, talk, or data, it takes a long time. The feedback loop, right, before that information really sinks in and changes the way people behave, takes a very long time. I think it's just having seen that multiple times, really, what I saw there. So 2 or 3 conclusions from that to your question. One is, yes, this shift is possible. It's absolutely possible. What does it take? It takes a container. You basically lock people into the room, right? They need to come up with a decision. So you create this experience for them. You need somebody who holds the space. In that case, kind of, it's the Secretary General, UN, or kind of, so it's in this role play there. But so you need somebody who really teaches people, right, about what you just decided. This is what it does to you and your countries, right? So there's like a little bit like allowing this data to really sink in, and then you need time, because it's so much breaking our conventional routines. It needs time to really sink in, and then kind of the shift happens, and people go from the usual process of denial to depression to, okay, what can we do now, much faster than it would have been otherwise. So I totally resonate with the question, and just offer that little experience. So the conclusion from that experience would be, how could we mass manufacture this kind of experience? What I explained, where I've seen groups of 25 going through multiple times in a period of 3 hours or something like that. How can we really mass produce this kind of experience for a lot more, and democratize the access to that, so that, we deal with the challenge that you described?
Mm-hmm. And then I'll end on this question, which touches a bit on what you're just saying in that great concrete example of the simulation you just gave. Pablo from Argentina, I'm going to amend his question slightly, but he's asking for more concrete thoughts about what you're witnessing in this moment. And perhaps you can share some really concrete examples of positive leadership or positive businesses or politicians who are handling this quite well and can be served as models going forward.
Well, yeah. So I think there is, in this moment, we see everything just heightened, right? And I think all the tensions, all the contradictory, it's not one picture that appears. It's kind of multiple pictures with very contradicting forces clashing, and I would say intensifying. And it also happens in our own emotions. I think there are like multiple great examples. I think the last one, so what I just find heartbreaking is here in the United States, in New York, in other places, the healthcare workers at the front line really putting their lives on the line, risking kind of their own well-being, in a situation where they constantly help COVID-19 patients without even having an insurance themselves. So they know sooner or later they are going to contract the virus, and they are not system. So we organize the system in a way that those who do the most essential work, right, to keep our well-being, right, going as a community, we pay them so incredible bad that they cannot even afford their own health insurance. And then so who walks away kind of with when you think about other jobs like let's say people who run the speculation economy that tends to destabilize rather than stabilize kind of the real economy in many cases. So it makes you really think about, so that's really seeing the effort, the outpouring of volunteer work and people helping each other, I think is something very moving. We see that in many communities, and it creates questions, right, for how is it possible that particularly all those who are in the front line now, who maybe through their jobs cannot even afford to self-isolate, right? So self-isolation is a privilege, right? So that is not available to all people at all. And how is it possible that we are not even able to pay living wages to these people? I think there's a perception of, also when you see that what's happening here in the US, kind of universal basic income, right? It was a crazy idea a few months or years ago. Now we're doing it, right? So the entire Senate voted for it, and we are doing it at least for once, right? But you see that in a way, so the Corona situation is forcing us to responses to new practices that will lead to also reconceive what is it really that we have our, what our economic relationships are about, and how can we bring more of our intention into the shaping of the economy. I think a lot of things, usually people grow up and say, well, the economy, the financial system, how can I know, right? So you have to study that. If you study that, then even those people don't understand. And so there's most people feel it's like higher forces, right? It's like natural law, right? I cannot change the law of gravity. I cannot change kind of how finance. But now we realize that's not true at all, right? Yes, true. I cannot change gravity, the law of gravity, but all the ways we organize the economy are actually human-made, right? So we can align them much more with our intentions than maybe previously thought. And I think this is something that's becoming very clear now. It will become even more clear in the next crisis we are going to have, whether that's a financial one or otherwise. And that will put this question, right, how we create and reshape and reinvent our economy in a way that creates sustainable well-being for all, more and more to the center of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. That was a wonderful note to end on. And thank you to everyone who's joined us here. Otto, is there anything you would like to add before we conclude this conversation?
No, all good. So maybe if you want to, for those of you who might be interested to check out the Gaia Journey, go to GaiaJourney.org, and that will put you kind of on a landing page. And it's like an open journey where you can just join for one session or several sessions, also without having visited the launch session last week. It was great talking to you all.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And everyone will have our next GLF Live next week. So that will be with Dr. Aaron Bernstein from Harvard about COVID-19 and health systems. So be sure to join back. And thank you again, Otto.